The wind cut across the dry Texas plains like a dull knife, kicking up red dust that clung to boots, truck tires, and broken dreams. Jake Lawson pulled his battered Stetson lower over his brow as he stepped onto the cracked gravel of the county fairgrounds. The auction was already in full swing, but Jake wasn't there to buy. He was there to sell what little he had left. His old pickup, held together more by hope than bolts, rattled behind him, its bed carrying rusted tools, 2 cracked saddles, and a single blue tarp flapping like a flag of surrender. The ranch was hanging by a thread. He'd sold the last of his cattle that spring, and the bank had stopped calling, never a good sign. The only thing left was a worn-out barn, 4 acres of dust, and memories too heavy to carry. He hated crowds. Always had. But desperation pushed him through the din of fast-talking auctioneers and the low murmur of cowboys and buyers sizing up livestock. He kept his head down, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, and handed off his goods to a tired-looking clerk without much conversation. Jake had just turned to leave when the microphone crackled overhead, and something strange caught his ear. "All right folks, this is a bit unorthodox," the announcer began, clearing his throat. "But due to some emergency family court orders and a paperwork mess-up, we've got one more lot before the lunch break. Lot number 57. A murmur passed through the crowd. Jake stopped mid-step. The announcer hesitated. "Lot 57 is a child. Boy, age 9. No relatives available, no foster family on record. He's here under emergency state supervision. Rules allow us to offer temporary guardianship until proper placement is found. Minimum bid, $1. Jake turned, slowly, as a stunned silence fell over the grounds. In the center of the auction ring stood a small boy in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt too big for his skinny frame. His hair was messy, like it hadn't seen a comb in days, and his hands clutched a crumpled plastic grocery bag that looked half empty. But it was the boy's eyes that held Jake, wide, glassy, like a spooked colt trying not to run. Someone in the crowd muttered, "What in God's name is this?" Another laughed nervously. A woman clutched her purse tighter and looked away. No one moved. The boy stood motionless, eyes darting from face to face. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just waited, like he already knew no one would raise a hand. Jake felt his heart twist in a way he hadn't felt in years, not since the accident that took his wife, and then slowly, everything else. The auctioneer's voice broke through again, more unsure now. "Anyone? $1. He'll be cared for, supervised. Just needs a roof and some meals. Anyone?" A full minute passed. Nothing but shuffling boots and coughs. Jake wasn't even sure when his hand went up. It moved on its own, like something inside him had seized control. A low gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by silence. The auctioneer blinked. We have one bid. Going once." Jake's throat was dry. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. He had no money. No plan. No business taking in a kid. Going twice. The boy looked at him now. Not hopeful. Just confused. "Sold. To Mr. Jake Lawson." Jake nodded once. He couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe right. All he knew was that he had just bought something that couldn't be hauled in a truck bed, something he didn't understand, something he might not survive. But as the boy stepped forward, still clutching that sad little bag, Jake saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition, maybe. Or fear. Or hope so faint it barely registered. The pickup groaned as Jake turned the key, coughing once before settling into a low idle. The passenger door creaked open slowly, and the boy climbed in without a word. He sat stiffly, holding his plastic bag in his lap like it might float away if he let go. Jake didn't look at him, just reached across the cab and clicked the seatbelt into place. The kid flinched a little but didn't pull away. They pulled out of the gravel lot in silence, the road stretching ahead like a ribbon of rust and heat. The auction ground shrank in the rearview mirror, swallowed by dust and distance. Jake adjusted the rearview to catch a glimpse of the boy, then quickly looked away. He didn't know what to say. Words didn't come easy to him on a good day, and this was something else entirely. The boy sat with his shoulders drawn in tight, like he was trying to fold himself smaller. His clothes hung off him like hand-me-downs from another life. One of his sneakers had a hole near the toe, and Jake could see the edge of a white sock turned gray with dust. The grocery bag in his lap had a small tear near the handle. Inside, Jake caught a glimpse of a worn-out coloring book, a broken crayon, and a photo, bent at the corners, of a smiling couple in front of a Christmas tree. Probably his parents. Jake looked away again. Mile after mile passed in silence. The only sounds were the occasional rattle from the glove box and the whine of old tires against cracked asphalt. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across open fields dotted with leaning fence posts and scrub. Jake thought about his wife then. About the nights she used to sit on the porch and hum while the sky turned orange. About the way she used to talk about adopting someday, when things were better. "When we're steady," she'd say. They never got the chance. After the accident, everything just stopped. The house grew quiet. The cattle thinned out. Friends stopped calling. The walls closed in. The only thing that kept him moving was routine, and even that was wearing thin. Now here he was, bringing home a boy with no last name and no place to go, because he couldn't stand to watch that auctioneer drop the gavel on a child like he was surplus feed. "You hungry?" Jake asked suddenly, eyes fixed on the road. The boy didn't respond. Just blinked. Jake cleared his throat. "There's a gas station a few miles up. Got sandwiches. Ain't much, but..." The boy nodded once, quick and small. They pulled into a dusty station with a flickering neon sign and a single rust-stained ice machine out front. Jake left the truck running and came back a minute later with a peanut butter sandwich, a bag of chips, and a chocolate milk. He set the bag on the boy's lap and closed the door without a word. The boy didn't eat right away, just held the sandwich for a few seconds before peeling back the wrapper like it might bite. Back on the road, Jake watched from the corner of his eye as the boy took slow, careful bites. He held the milk with both hands like it might slip away. There was something in the way he drank it that made Jake's chest ache, the kind of silence that wasn't about shyness, but survival. The sun had almost dipped below the horizon when Jake's ranch came into view. The place looked tired, boards missing from the fence, the roofline sagging, the paint on the barn faded to a dull ghost of red. The windmill turned lazily in the breeze, creaking like old bones. Jake pulled into the gravel drive and cut the engine. The truck gave one last rattle before going quiet. The boy looked out the window, then down at the photo in his hand, his fingers tracing the edges. He didn't say anything. He hadn't said a word since stepping into the truck. Jake opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching against the dirt. The boy followed slowly, grocery bag still clutched like a lifeline. His feet dragged just a little, like every step was a gamble. Winter came early that year, sweeping across the plains in sharp winds and bitter silence. The sky hung low over the ranch, gray and swollen with snow, and the earth froze hard beneath Jake's boots. The barn door groaned every time he pulled it open, the hinges complaining like they'd rather just give up. Jake felt the same some mornings, waking before the sun to a cold that settled in his bones and stayed there all day. Inside the house, the wood stove crackled weakly, trying its best to keep the cold from creeping in through every drafty seam. Jake had stuffed old towels in the windowsills and nailed plastic across the frames, but it wasn't enough. He was down to burning splintered fence posts and old pallets now, anything that would give off heat. Every log he fed the fire felt like he was tossing away a piece of the ranch's history, just to survive one more night. Eli never complained. Not once. The boy had been with Jake a little over a month now, and though he still spoke sparingly, his silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the quiet of someone watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to help. Jake would come in from a freezing morning in the barn to find a mug of warm tap water sitting on the table, the closest thing to coffee either of them could afford. When he left his coat hanging by the door, Eli would shake the snow off and hang it properly on the peg, like he was keeping order in the little ways that counted. One morning, just after the first real snowstorm, Jake trudged out to the chicken coop and found Eli already there, wearing Jake's oversized gloves and a flannel shirt that trailed past his knees. He was scattering feed in careful lines, whispering something to the hens in a voice too soft for Jake to make out. Jake didn't say a word, just leaned against the fence and watched. The boy moved slowly but surely, mimicking Jake's motions from days before, as if memorizing a new language. When he finally turned and saw Jake, he didn't flinch like he used to. He just gave a small nod, almost like they were equals. From that day forward, Eli was up before Jake most mornings. He'd pull on his too big coat and boots stuffed with newspaper and follow him step for step across the frozen fields. He didn't have much strength, but he made up for it with focus. If Jake chopped wood, Eli stacked it. If Jake fixed a latch, Eli held the nails. He even started drawing little diagrams on scraps of paper, ideas for patching leaks in the barn roof, suggestions for a better chicken feeder, sketches of a vegetable garden they could plant come spring. One evening, Jake found a paper left on the kitchen table with Eli's ranch plans scribbled across the top. It had stick figures and crooked lines, but also clear ideas: fix broken gate so horses don't get out, save eggs to sell, maybe get goat milk. In the corner, underlined twice, was the word hope. It was misspelled hop, but Jake stared at it for a long time anyway. The days were still hard. Harder than ever. Money was running lower than low. Jake had skipped meals more than once so Eli wouldn't have to. He was trying to stretch a few dozen canned goods into a season's worth of dinners, and the old truck had started making a new, more serious noise that he tried to ignore. But something about the boy's presence, his quiet persistence, made it harder for Jake to give in to the urge to quit. Eli brought home a bundle of sticks one day, his arms barely able to carry it. When Jake asked where he'd found it, the boy pointed toward the creek bed. "Good kindling," he said softly. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken in days. Jake nodded, throat tight, and helped him stack it near the stove. That night, Jake caught him carving something into the side of an old wooden crate with the end of a bent nail. Jake was about to scold him, then stopped when he saw the word slowly taking shape: home. The county fair rolled into town under a banner of blue skies and the scent of kettle corn drifting through the breeze. After a winter that felt like it would never end, spring had arrived in bursts of wildflowers and warm sunbeams, and with it came the fair, an annual gathering that marked a kind of reset for the whole community. Jake hadn't planned on going. He hadn't gone in years. Not since before the accident. Not since life had carved out everything soft in him and left behind the barest shape of the man he used to be. But Eli had been talking about it for weeks, in his quiet way. Not asking, not pestering, just mentioning little things. How the neighbor's kid had entered a pie in the baking contest. How Miss Luann from the feed store was judging the crafts. And, once, very softly, "They have honey contests too, don't they?" Jake didn't think much of it. Sure, he kept bees. Had for years, ever since his wife started it as a hobby, and he kept it going after she passed, more out of habit than hope. He'd bottled some of the honey each fall, labeled it with masking tape and left it on the kitchen shelf. He never sold it. He never shared it. It was just one more thing that used to mean something. The morning of the fair, Jake woke to the smell of pancakes. Not the usual box mix either, real ones, with eggs and milk. He stumbled into the kitchen and found Eli standing at the stove, a spatula in one hand, his other balancing a plate stacked high with golden brown pancakes. Jake blinked. "Where'd you get?" Eli just smiled. Traded some eggs to Mrs. Crane. He flipped another pancake with surprising ease. You said we needed to eat more in the mornings anyway. Jake couldn't argue. He sat down and let the boy feed him like it was the most natural thing in the world. After breakfast, Eli disappeared into the shed and came out holding 2 glass jars of Jake's honey, polished clean, labels handwritten in careful block letters. I already entered them, Eli said, avoiding Jake's eyes. You just have to bring them. Jake stared at the jars, throat tight. He didn't know whether to laugh or scold. You entered my honey. Eli nodded. It's good. And the fair's today. They didn't speak much on the drive into town, but the silence was easy now, filled with something that felt almost like peace. The fairgrounds were alive with music, laughter, and the clatter of kids chasing one another with cotton candy in their hands. Jake walked a step behind Eli, letting the boy lead the way through the rows of booths and tractors and tents. The honey contest table was near the livestock pens, decorated with gingham cloth and jars in all shapes and sizes. Jake recognized some names. Local families with generations of beekeepers, folks who knew their way around a hive like they knew their own kitchens. Eli placed Jake's jars carefully on the table, then pulled out a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. I wrote about it too. Why it's special. Jake looked down at the paper, read the first line, and had to look away. This honey tastes like my mom's laugh and my dad's voice when he tells me I'm safe. That was all he managed before the rest blurred. Judging took over an hour. People wandered past, complimenting the neat jars and sniffing at the samples. Jake didn't expect much. He stood off to the side, hat low, hands shoved in his pockets. But when they called his name over the loudspeaker, first place, honey category, Jake Lawson, Lawson Ranch, he didn't move. It was Eli who grabbed his hand and tugged him forward, grinning like a kid with a secret. Up at the podium, Miss Luann handed him a blue ribbon, then leaned into the mic. Now, this here entry came with a story, she said, her voice warm with emotion. A story that moved the judges so much, we thought the town ought to hear it. Eli stepped forward, face flushed, and unfolded the same paper. His voice trembled at first, but as the crowd hushed, he steadied. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, he began, eyes scanning the faces before him. But one man changed that. He didn't have money, or a big house, or a plan. He just saw a kid who needed something, and gave what he had. A murmur moved through the crowd. Some people shifted closer. Others lowered their heads. This honey, Eli said, holding up the jar, isn't just sweet. It's safe. It's home. And it's made by the person who saved me. I just wanted to return the favor. The sun rose over Lawson Ranch with a kind of quiet pride, spilling golden light over the rolling fields, the newly mended fences, and the weather-worn barn that now stood a little straighter than it had the year before. The windmill creaked a slow, familiar rhythm, and somewhere down by the chicken coop, a rooster crowed late, as if even he was still stretching into the comfort of a morning that no longer felt so heavy. Inside the house, the smell of toast and eggs drifted through the kitchen. Jake stood at the stove, spatula in hand, wearing an apron that said Head Ranch Chef in messy, permanent marker letters. Eli had made it last month during a school art project. It had a handprint on the front and a lopsided heart on the back. Jake never cooked without it. Eli sat at the small wooden table, swinging his legs as he read out loud from a book about animal tracks. His voice was steadier now, with the soft Texas twang he'd picked up from Jake. The boy had grown a couple of inches since that first winter, his shoulders filling out, eyes brighter. His hair was longer too, shaggy in a way Jake hadn't had the heart to cut. There were still shadows sometimes. Quiet nights when Eli stared a little too long out the window, or mornings when he lingered near Jake, like needing to make sure he hadn't disappeared overnight. But mostly, he was just a kid again. Jake plated the eggs, slid them across the table, and sat down with a contented sigh. You remember to pack your gloves for today? He asked between bites. Eli nodded. Yup. And my notebook. I'm gonna show Mr. Hanson my planting chart. He said if I keep this up, I might be the youngest member of the 4-H gardening club. Jake smiled behind his coffee cup. Told you you were a natural. Outside, the garden they'd started together was already green with promise, rows of sprouting carrots, beans, and a hopeful line of corn. Last year, they barely got it planted in time for the frost. This year, it had been prepped and tilled and cared for like it mattered. Because now, it did. After breakfast, they headed out to the barn, boots crunching over gravel. The horses nickered when they approached. Eli's favorite, a gentle old mare named June, sticking her head over the stall for an ear scratch. He obliged without a second thought, murmuring to her like Jake used to do with the cattle when no one was watching. The barn was different now. Not just cleaner, but fuller. Jake had taken on 2 foster calves from a nearby rancher who fell sick over the winter. He didn't have much, but enough to give them space and feed. Eli had named them Rocket and Dusty and kept a chart of their weights tacked to the wall. Later that day, the mail arrived with a heavy envelope marked with the county seal. Jake turned it over in his hands before opening it at the kitchen counter, heart pounding in that quiet way it did when he was waiting for news that might tilt the whole world. Eli stood nearby, pretending not to watch but gripping the edge of the table. Jake unfolded the papers, his eyes scanning the legal jargon until he landed on the words that mattered most: finalized adoption decree. He exhaled slowly, then looked up. Well, he said softly. Looks like it's official now. Eli didn't say anything at first. He just stared at Jake with wide eyes, then launched himself into his arms, nearly knocking him over. Jake held him tight, stronger than he thought he could, the years of silence and sorrow melting away in a single, perfect moment.